Hello, Yogiful family. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about fairies. And there's a little fairy named Frank. And we're going to learn how he got his fairy wings. He really wanted his fairy wings and he just couldn't figure out how to get them. So let's do some fairy breathing and then we'll move on and find out how Frank can get his fairy wings. For fairy breathing, I have some fancy fairy wings, but don't worry if you don't have any. You don't need them. All you need is your 2 hands and arms and your imagination. So we're going to lift our arms up as we inhale, and as we do this, we're gonna go up on our tippy toes, okay? So we inhale, lifting up on our tippy toes, lifting our arms up as high as we can, and exhale, we come back down onto our heels. Let's try that one more time. Inhale, coming up, and exhale. And let's try this 4 more times. Ready? Inhale, and as we inhale, imagining glitter coming up from our toes to our knees, to our bellies, to the tips of our hands, and exhale, coming down. And inhale, coming up, glitter filling up our body, and exhale, coming down. And inhale, coming up, glitter filling up all the way to our fingertips, and exhale, coming down. One more time. Inhale, coming up, and exhale, coming down. Let's go learn about Frank and if he ever got his fairy wings. It's time for another yoga adventure. This one is about Frank the fairy. So when you see me doing yoga poses, go ahead and do them with me. Let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a fairy named Frank. Let's go to fairy pose. So bringing our feet to the ground, a little bit apart, we're going to shift the weight to one foot and drive that other foot back, like we're a fairy. And your arms can be out or to your side, whatever feels comfortable. And Frank the fairy was a really sweet and kind fairy, but he didn't have any wings, and he asked all the time why he didn't have wings. Let's switch feet. And Frank was so impatient because he just figured it was time for him to have his wings. He's a kind person, he does nice things for people, but he still didn't have his wings. So he was very impatient at this point because he'd done everything he could possibly think of. Let's do impatient fairy pose. So lifting our arms up, bringing our hands to our knees. Lifting our hands up, one more time, make a mean fairy face. And Frank really tried everything he could. He even tried fairy dust, because there's a lot of fairy dust in his fairy village. So lifting up onto our toes, grabbing our fairy dust, and we're gonna sprinkle the fairy dust down. Let's try that again. Lifting up and sprinkle the fairy dust down. One more time, lifting up and sprinkle the fairy dust down. But Frank still didn't have any wings, and he was feeling impatient yet again. So to calm himself down, he decided to go visit his favorite waterfall. Let's fly there. You don't need wings to fly if you're a fairy. So shifting the weight again for fairy pose. And switch feet. And when Frank got to the water, he decided to jump in. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And looking around, bending our knees and pretending to swim. Can you bend your knees a little bit more? Yeah, and we're swimming. Whoa! And then we see the huge waterfall. Lifting our arms up for waterfall pose. And coming back up. One more time. The waterfall was beautiful. And when Frank was swimming around, he noticed a little frog at the edge of the water. And the frog was sitting like this, so come to sad frog pose. Sitting down in a deep squat, bringing our knuckles together, making fists. For sad or angry frog pose. So Frank the fairy swam over to the frog and asked, "Hey, what's going on, friend? Why are you sitting on the edge and why do you look so sad? And the frog said, well, I really want to go under the waterfall, but I'm just too scared. So Frank the fairy, go back to Frank the fairy pose, had a great idea. Ding! Frank the fairy decided to build a leaf boat with his friend the frog. So coming down onto our bottoms, lifting up our legs. You can keep your knees bent if that feels good. If it feels really good, you could straighten your legs, but for now, we'll keep them nice and bent. And now we're in our leaf boat. Ready to row? Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but an applesauce. That's not how the song goes. Let's try it one more time. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a frog. Well, they made it to the waterfall, and then they got splashed by all the water coming back to waterfall pose. Whoosh, whoosh. And at this point, coming back to boat pose, the frog was so happy that it got to go under the water and feel what it was like to be under a waterfall before, because they'd never gone under a waterfall because they were too scared. And while they were on the boat, Frank the fairy asked the frog, hey, how do I get my wings? Coming back onto our knees to a sitting position. And the frog said, I don't really know, but I do know what to do when I feel really overwhelmed. And Frank the fairy said, please tell me, I feel so impatient right now. So they found a comfortable seated position, and the frog taught Frank the fairy how to meditate. So they grabbed their fingers like this, found a little mudra, and relaxed for a second. And Frank the fairy was like this, and like this, and didn't really understand. But finally, Frank could close his eyes for a second and relax. Frank took a big, deep breath and felt great. And Frank decided it was about time to head back home. So, coming up to standing, Frank the fairy said, bye, Mr. Frog. And the frog said, bye, Frank. Thanks for helping me. That was so fun going under the waterfall. And Frank the fairy was off to go back to his mushroom home. Let's go to mushroom home pose. Coming onto our knees, lifting our arms up overhead, and we turned our body into a mushroom. And let's fly back to our home. So, going back to Frank the fairy pose, lifting up one foot, and we're gonna fly home. Do, 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 do. And switch feet. Do, 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 do. And when Frank the fairy was flying home, he noticed something. It was coming down to downward dog pose. It was the fairy dog mother. What? And Frank asked the fairy dog mother, hey, what can I do? I really, really, really want to have wings. Coming back to sitting. And the fairy dog mother said, well, Frank, do you love yourself without wings? And Frank the fairy, let's go back to Frank the fairy pose. He said, of course I love myself, but I feel like I'll really love myself like 100% once I have wings. Switch feet. It just seems really important to have wings. I mean, I'm a fairy, I need wings. Let's go back to downward dog pose or fairy dog mother pose. And the fairy dog mother said, well, Frank, you can fly without wings. You don't need your wings. And it's very important that you love yourself right now, exactly how you are. It doesn't matter if you have wings or not. Of course, wings are beautiful, but you have to fully love yourself no matter who you are right now. Going back to Frank pose, Frank said, well, I guess you're right. I never really thought about it like that. What can I do to really love myself? Switching our legs. I'm a bit confused. I don't know what I can do. Coming back to downward dog pose. The fairy godmother said, well, you can look at a mirror and tell yourself kind things every single day until you start believing them. So Frank the fairy flew all the way back to his mushroom home. And when he got there, he pulled out his special mushroom mirror, coming down to sitting, reaching up high, grabbing our mirror. And Frank the fairy looked at himself and said, I love myself so much. I love myself exactly where I am right now. Whether I have wings or not, I am a good, kind person. I don't need wings to make me beautiful, and I don't need anything. I love myself right now. Frank the fairy had a pretty long day, going and helping the frog, swimming in the waterfall, trying to get wings with fairy dust, and then meeting the ancestor fairy dog mother. So Frank decided it was time to go to bed. So he lay down into child's pose and got really, really comfortable. So laying your head down and completely relaxing for a minute. And when Frank the fairy woke up, he decided to stand up and he stretched. And he shook out one of his legs. And he shook out his other leg. And he shook out one arm. And he shook out the other arm. And then he realized something. He realized that he had wings! What? After all that, Frank finally got his wings. And along the way, he learned how to be kind to a scared frog. He learned how to meditate, and he talked with his ancestor, the fairy dog mother, and learned how to love himself whether he had wings or not. Wow. Let's take a couple minutes and relax. All right, fairies, it's time to relax for a minute. So go ahead and find a comfortable position. You can lay on your back with your belly up. You can sit like I am, or you can find any other comfortable position that feels very relaxing for you. And wherever you are, hopefully you're in a spot that will be somewhat quiet for the next couple minutes. And while we're here, let's go ahead and close our eyes. And if closing our eyes doesn't feel comfortable, we can find a soft gaze with our eyes, just staring at one object. Now that we're here, let's imagine hundreds of fairies, all different colors, shapes, and sizes. And they're all coming over right to us. And these fairies go down to our toes. And these fairies have magical fairy dust in their pockets. And this fairy dust is just for you. So what color is this fairy dust? And is there any glitter in it? Now that the fairies have all this special dust, they start sprinkling it on your toes. And they sprinkle it on your knees, and your thighs, and your hips, and your belly, and your chest, and your shoulders. And they start sprinkling it all the way down your arms to the tips of your fingers. Imagining these fairies working their way to your neck and covering your neck in fairy dust. Working their way to your head and face and chin, lips, eyes, cheeks, eyebrows, and forehead. Don't forget about the ears. And last but not least, they sprinkle fairy dust all over your hair. And now we're covered in fairy dust. What does it feel like to have fairy dust all over us? Do you notice anything different? Just like Frank the fairy, let's remember to love ourselves right now. Not when we have a new bike or fairy wings. We don't need anything to love ourselves in this moment. We are exactly where we need to be. So let's go ahead and roll onto one side, using our arms to lift ourselves up to a comfortable seated position. Keeping our eyes closed, I'm going to play the sound of the singing bowl one more time. And when you don't hear the singing bowl anymore, you can raise your hand up to the sky and go ahead and open your eyes. Ready? Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for flying by. And remember, stay yogiful. Namaste, namaste, namaste. Bye-bye.
Hello kids, get your yoga on. Join with me, it'll be real fun.